And I can send it.
Oh, recording's in progress. Okay, there we go. Moshe, take it away.
Okay, so if we, you can always edit out things, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Hi, so we're going to take a look at Pirke Avot today in the first chapter and eventually connect it with the Decalogue. But there's a lot to go into first in Avot itself before we can compare it with the Decalogue. Try to understand what's going on in it. Pirke Avot is a Mesechet of Mishnah, one of the 60 or 62, depending how you count, Mesechtot of Mishnah. And it's unusual because it's the only one that does not have any halakha in it. If you look at Mishnah at all, you're probably familiar with the fact that it's all, or mostly all, laws and details about laws and arguments about laws that becomes the basis for the Talmud afterwards. But this one Mesechet out of the 60 is quite different. It's presented as a collection of sayings by the Chachamim of different generations. And they're presented in the 5 chapters of Pirke Avot in different ways. And we're going to be looking at the first chapter, which is actually very neat because everything in it is chronological. It goes from Moses at Sinai and reaches the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi. And it does that in an interesting way. It begins at the very beginning with Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, and we'll come back to that in a minute, and goes through generations that Moses gave it to. Then we have in the middle the generations of the Second Temple period, who passed along the Torah from one to another. And at the end of this first chapter, we have 3 members of Beit Hillel who are in reverse order: Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who is Rabbi's father; Rabbi Shimon, who was his great-grandfather; Rabban Gamliel was his great-great-grandfather; and Hillel, who's just before this, is his great-great-great. How many greats did I put in there? 5th generation back of Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi.
A lot of nepotism here.
Well, he is the prime descendant for us in terms of reading the Mishnah of Beit Hillel. He also studied with teachers from other parts of the rabbinic tradition, but he himself carries the title of Nasi, Rabban, from Hillel. Through those generations, they have Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi, the same title of Rabbi. So let's look in a little more detail about what actually gets transmitted here, because that's what's going to interest us. And we see in the very beginning, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, Masrua the Yoshua. Moses received Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. There's a problem here. Would anybody like to point it out?
Did Moshe receive the Torah at Sinai?
Did Moshe receive the Torah at Sinai? Was that a question? I didn't catch that.
Isn't that the question?
Well, that certainly could be a question, but in terms of the way we are going to read, we want to take things as they are written and try to accept them and go with what's written. It says Kibel Misinai, but there's a problem with the word Torah. It does not say Ha-Torah. There's a difference between Torah and Ha-Torah. The difference being Would somebody like to propose what the difference might be?
Doesn't Torah mean teachings? And Ha-Torah would mean the specific teachings?
Yeah,
we're-
yeah. One is a specific, the Torah, and the other is a generic term for teachings, a teaching. So that's
Okay.
actually what it says here. Moshe Kibel Torah, not ha-Torah. So if we read it as Torah, then it's a teaching from Sinai, the Masu al Yoshua. And with that, we also solved another problem, which we didn't mention. When it says it was given to Joshua, that's actually not what it says in the Torah. We're not going to look at the source now, but if you can find it in Dvarim, towards the end of Dvarim, when Moses actually writes something, he gives it in a number of copies. One copy is given to the Kohanim, who are to put it near the tablets, in the of the Aron, Mishkan. And other copies he writes for the Nesi'im, for each of the 12 tribes. But there is no mention of giving it to Joshua. Let that sink in for a minute. We're talking about...
There's no mention of what?
What?
I'm sorry, there's no mention of what? I didn't hear you.
There was no mention in the Torah of Moses giving over Torah to Joshua. He appoints Joshua as a civilian leader of the people, but he does not give him personally the Torah. So what we have here, first of all, then, is something which is extra biblical. It's something which is not mentioned in the text of the Torah. Moses gives a teaching to Joshua, a teaching which is not necessarily something in the Torah or connected to the Torah. However, since we're told specifically that it's also Sinai, it's from Sinai, so then we have little choice but to say Moses received, in addition to the Torah, another teaching, at least one other teaching at Sinai, which he gave to Joshua, and not to the Nesi'im, not to the leaders of the community, not to the priests, just to Joshua. Now, what did Joshua do with this? We know that we have a book of Joshua, but it doesn't relate to that book. What Joshua did, he gave this teaching to the Skenim. The Skenim, that term here, Yoshua Skenim, that is supposedly the judges. It's a term for judges who lived at the same time and after the time of Joshua. And they're mentioned in the Torah as the Skenim, the elders who continued to be the judges at the time right after Joshua. And the next period, after the period of the judges, is mentioned, the Skenim, the Nevi'im, that's in our third line, the Skenim, then transferred this Torah to the Nevi'im, and the Nevi'im transferred it to Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Now, who are Anshe Knesset HaGdolah? Are you familiar with them?
Well, help us out.
Anybody there can help us?
Is that the Sanhedrin?
Well, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah is the group that ruled after the end of the period of the prophets, and last of the prophets are Ezra and Nehemiah, who returned from Babel. So this is now basically the beginning of the period of the return from Babel. Knesset HaGdolah is instituted at that point. And we don't know too much about it. We don't know exactly how long it lasted historically. But what we do have here in our text is that this body, which existed at least, let's say, 400 years before the time of Rebbe of the Mishnah, maybe a little bit more than that, is actually quoted here as having made a statement. That right away sort of lights some kind of lights that Rebbe has a statement from a body, Knesset Dolah, which is quoted as having left some aphorism 400 years ago, and that's all that we have in their name. So right away, it sort of makes you wonder what's going on with this text. But let's also think a little bit about what we just heard, that Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, Masur Yoshua, as Moses had something in hand about the Torah, teaching, which he gave to Joshua, not to the people, not to the priests, not to the kings, Joshua to the Zkenim to the Nevi'im, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. So this is the end of a period that we're going to go into right away with the, let's mention one bet here, Shimon HaTzadik, Haya Mishirei Knesset HaGdolah. He was the last of the members of the Knesset HaGdolah, and he makes a statement, and then we have finally in 1 Gimel over here, Antigonos Isoko Kibel Mishimon HaTzadik. We're going back to transfer from one individual to another single individual. So make note, we have a teaching that was given from Sinai, which passes from generation to generation through just a few individuals, sometimes just one individual in a generation. What would you call that kind of teaching?
Esoteric.
I think that's a good word.
Yes.
Could be much more esoteric. So very unobtrusively, without most people noticing it, Rebbe tells us that he is speaking about an esoteric tradition, a tradition which came from Moses, but was transmitted by way of individuals or very, very small groups from generation to generation. We're not going to read what these people actually said here in row 1, because we're going to start actually looking at content and what comes afterwards. But I just want to point one thing out here. In 1 Gimel, the person who's mentioned is Antigonos. What kind of Hebrew name is that?
Not, it's a Greek name.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not a Hebrew name at all. So what we're seeing here at the very end of this period, which is the period of Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, which is the period of the building of the Second Temple, is it leads up to the period of Hellenization. And in fact, the character that's mentioned in 1 bet, Shimon HaTzadik, who was actually a Kohen Gadol in his time, the last one mentioned here. He is mentioned as the last remnant of the Knesset HaGdolah. And in the Talmud, it is there's a story about him meeting with Alexander the Great.
Oh.
So that places that for us precisely in the year 332 before the Common Era. So
how long before Rebbe wrote this Pirke Avot?
Well, let's put it this way: it's 400 years before the destruction of the temple.
Right. Yes.
Right, 400 years from the temple. From that point, from the first visit of Alexander's, the destruction of the temple, the period of Hellenism at that time would be 400 years.
Okay.
And then times change. Okay, so we're starting off now with this understanding that we're looking at an esoteric tradition that has not been mentioned in terms of any kind of content until we're told about these specific individuals, Shimon HaTzadik and Antignos Isoko. And we have very simple aphorisms in the names of each. Let's look at one of them quickly so we'll remember something that I'm sure you all know. Shimon HaTzadik is quoted here saying, Al Shloshad Farim Ha'olam Omeid, Al Torah, Al Ha'avodah, Yag Milut Chasadim. It's a great principle. I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about that and what it implies and what's involved in it. However, it does not tell us anything about the esoteric knowledge that was passed from Moses to Joshua, the Skenim, and onwards. So we start with the question. Rebbe is introducing us to the fact that there is an esoteric tradition and that he has knowledge of how it was passed down from generation to generation, but he doesn't really tell us anything directly about the content of that esoteric tradition. We have interesting aphorisms, and we're going to have a lot of them as we go. And we're also going to try to understand what's going on here in terms of transmitting this esoteric tradition, why that appears in the background of this collection of aphorisms of Chachamim. Beginning with row 2 now, go into this new period. It's called the period of the pairs. And there are 5 pairs. You'll see 2 Aleph, 2 Bet, 3 Aleph, 3 Bet. There are 5 pairs going down our page. And each of them has an aphorism. So they come in pairs now. And we're going to look at them in the way they are paired and what their subjects are. And we'll begin with a little knowledge about the pairs, which is in Mesechet Hagigah in the 2nd chapter. It's the only other place where they appear. The 5 pairs appear there with a machloket that goes down from generation to generation between all of the pairs. And there Rebbe tells us that the first of each pair is the Nasi, and the second in each pair is the Av Beit Din. We don't know entirely what the function was within the nation of the Nasi and the Av Beit Din. We have to remember that we're talking about, at this point, early 2nd Temple. So there's also a high priest. There were also kings of the latter part of the 2nd Temple. So we're talking about yet another line of authority, a line which is independent of the priesthood. There will be no priests in what we see now.
Moshe, when you say Nasi, it's often translated as like prince?
President.
Yes.
Or
Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi is Rabbi Yehudah the Prince.
prince.
And that title is what continues down eventually through Beit Hillel.
So prince of what? Usually the prince is the son of the king, in a kingdom. Is this like a tribal leader?
Well, in the Torah, the term Nasi is used for the leader of the tribe. There are 12 Nasi. At this point, there is a Nasi, but there's also an Av Beit Din. Apparently, the Nasi was someone who had contact with authorities, whereas the Av Beit Din was somebody who was more turned to the necessities of running the system within the country. Although that also is not entirely clear. We don't even know for sure whether these people who are mentioned, at least far, far back here in our first pair, ever existed. Let's look at part of the problematics there. We're starting now at the period I mentioned, about 300 BCE. And we're going to continue to the fifth pair. We can jump down to see who that is. That's Hillel and Shammai, who everybody knows as the final pair. The time of Hillel and Shammai is the time of destruction of the temple. They are the last leaders from the time of the temple. That means that the period that's covered by these five pairs is a period of 400 years. And they are reported to have transferred their knowledge from pair to pair, something which seems as unlikely as the generations in the early part of Genesis, where people lived for 900 years or 120 years. Here we have ostensibly each pair ruling for 80 years, at least, in order to make up the 400 years between the five pairs.
That's the math.
So there's a problem. It's beginning to look more like what's before us is a composition rather than a history. It presents itself in the format of history, what's passed from generation to generation. But now we'll look into the details. It's a bit difficult to maintain that view. So we'll also have to ask what Rebbe is up to. Why is he doing this? Why is he presenting it in such a way? Let's start reading. The first pair is Yosei ben Yoezer ish Tzreda, and Yosei ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim. They received the teaching from those that came just before them, Antigonos and Shimon Tzaddik, or just Antigonos. Not clear, because it says Kiblu Mihem, so it's probably from the two of them. But this is the first pair. So who would like to read 2 Aleph? Volunteer? Then you have it on your sheets also. I'll try to make it bigger here, make sure it's legible.
You want to read, Osher? Sure. Osher can read.
Good.
יוסי בן יעזר איש שרדה, אומר יהי ביתך בית ועד לחכמים, והווי מתאבק באפר רגליהם, והווי שותה בצמא את דבריהם.
Good. Beit vad l'chachamim. It's a wonderful description. I'm sure everybody would like to have a house like that.
Well, let's translate it.
Okay, so first
I can read the translation if you want.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
so Yossi ben Yoezer of Tzerada said, "Let your house be a meeting place for the sages. Sit in the dust of their feet and drink in their words thirstily."
Wonderful.
Yes.
So we're beginning here with a recommendation, let's say, of how you should live in your house. What's the best way to arrange your house? Make it a place where the chachamim come and meet, and you should just be able to sit there and listen to their words as they speak. Seems like the Baal Bayit here is being addressed is actually pretty passive. He's a listener at this point.
He's a host.
A host. Good. He's a host. Let's go to the next one, to 2-bet now, because what we'll be doing as we go is comparing in each pair to see what the difference is. So let's read 2-bet.
Sure. Hold on a sec.
יוסי בן יוחנן, איש ירושלים, אומר, יהי ביתך פתוח לרווחה, ויהיו עניים בני ביתך, ואל תרבה שיחה עם האישה, באשתו אמרו קל וחומר באשת חברו, מכאן אמרו חכמים, כל המרבה שיחה עם האישה גורם רע לעצמו ובוטל מדברי תורה, בסופו יורש גיהנום. Oh my gosh.
I was waiting for that response.
So, in translation, Yossi ben Yochanan of Jerusalem said, "Let your house be open wide. Let the needy be part of your household. Do not speak too much with women. They said this of one's own wife. How much more is it true of another man's wife? Hence the sages said, when a man speaks too much with women, he brings evil upon himself, neglects the study of the law, and in the end will come to perdition."
Okay. And I'm willing to hear more responses against Yossi ben Yochanan's word.
You know, not a very modern concept.
I got no
No.
objections, just
Perdition is like hell.
Just to sort of balance this a little bit, I'm going to skip down to the second chapter. We'll come right back in a second. Where we have a somewhat different thing. This is Rabbi Elazar, who's speaking and is supposed to say 3 things. I'll read here. Warm yourselves at the fires of the Chachamim. Here, before we said drink in the words, here's warm yourself at the fires. But be careful of their coals, you don't get burned. That they bite like a fox, and they sting like a scorpion, and they have a what's this, a rasp like a snake, and all their words are fire. So you're also warned to keep your distance from the Chachamim. They're also dangerous. So it's quite balanced. Chachamim say you got to be careful with everybody. Even though we're told here to invite them into your house and sit down and listen to their words. Okay, so what are the differences here? First of all, before we get to the differences, what's the same? This is amazing. We have 2 people with the same name, Yossi, who both begin their statements with Yeh Beit Cha. So we have a framework here of what's going on in the house. But how do they differ?
Well, who they're inviting is different.
Okay. Who are they inviting?
Well, in Aleph, they're inviting Chachamim, right? And in Bet, they're inviting poor people, the needy.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of the extremes of society.
Actually, even before it says that your house should be open to all, patuach v'rvacha, and even the poor can come in and be as part of your household.
The first one, it's only affirmative, right? This is what you should do. And in the second one, there's a negative. There's a, right? There's something you don't do.
Yes, yeah, very good. This is a strong point, which we'll keep in mind as we go. But the first one is positive, tells you how to get something good, and the other tells you how to avoid something bad. So it's sort of positive and negative, maybe carrot and stick. One more thing I want to point out before we go on into bet, that the last thing that Yossi ben Yochanan actually says is Al Tarbeh Sicha im Ha'isha. There are two more voices that come in after that. When it says Be'ishto Amru, that's clearly an editorial gloss on the words of Yossi ben Yochanan. That's not the same person speaking. That is, he said, just don't speak too much with women. The next person adds to that and says, this is actually spoken about one's own wife. So much the more so with your friend's wife. And now a third voice comes in and says, Mikan Amru Chachamim. So the Chachamim now are a third voice, Kol Hamarbeh Sicha im Ha'isha. So we actually have three different speakers here. Only one is the introduced, announced speaker, Yossi ben Yochanan. So not only is the description of a house that's open for others to come in, we actually see strangers coming in to this aphorism and bringing in their own additions to it. Later, that will be significant.
I have a question. Al tivra sicha im ha'isha. It doesn't say
Tarbeh.
harbe. Where's it say? Oh, tarbe.
Tarbeh.
What is al tarbe sicha? Too much. I
Don't
see.
speak a lot. Yeah, don't
Got
speak
it.
a lot.
Got it. Thank you. That was my question.
Yeah. Okay. So we have now seen how to arrange our house for good and for careful. So let's go into the next pair. 3, Yeshua ben Pirke and Nitai Arbeli, Kiblu Mihem. We're now going pair to pair. Each pair of Nasi and Av Beit Din are presented as having received the teaching from the pair that came before them. Okay. 3 Aleph.
Okay, hold on.
יהושע בן פרחיה אומר, עשה לך רב וקנה לך חבר והווה דן את כל האדם לכף זכות.
Translation. Yoshua ben Pirchia said, get yourself a teacher, acquire a comrade, and give the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, benefit of the doubt there. We can be a little bit more literal and say, judge everyone positively. Okay. Let's go on. They're short. We'll compare them right away. Nitai Arbeli.
Shalosh bet.
ניתאי הארבלי אומר, הרחק משכן רע, סליחה, הרחק משכן רע, ואל תתחבר לרשע, ואל תתייאש מן הפורענות.
Okay.
3 bet.
It's 3 bet we're at?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I think I read 2 bet too, didn't I?
No.
I read that.
That's fine.
I see, because I'm looking at the translation and here it's 2b, but here it's 3 bet.
I don't know.
Right?
I'm not on that page right now.
Yes, I'm so okay. That's right. So Nitai, the Arbelite, said, stay away from an evil neighbor, do not associate with the wicked, and do not despair of retribution. Okay.
So first of all, technically, each of these is a 3-part statement. If we look back at the first pair, we'd see also internally each of them is also a three-part statement. Looking at the parts here, we have a Selech Rav on one side, and the other side, Archek Mishachein Ra. Again, drawing us back to what we had in the first pair, we have something positive on one side, a Rav, like we had the Chakamim in 2 Aleph, and we have something bad, the Shachein Ra, on the other side. The next part, you can see on my screen that it's highlighted, Knelecha Chaver V'al Titchaber L'Rasha. The reason that's highlighted is we have the same root there, Chaver, Chaber, a connection, someone you are connected with. So you should get yourself a Chaver, and the understanding there of Chaver is somebody who is a student in the yeshiva. That's your Chavrusa, it's called your Chaver. So get yourself a rabbi, Selech Rav, and a Chavrusa, and sit and judge everyone well. On the other side, we're still worried. Stay away from a bad neighbor. Don't get mixed up with bad people. And do not despair of punishment. I'll teach you Ishman. So actually, both of them end with something having to do with judgment. So we can see that these two statements have actually been put together quite in parallel. The same as we had in the first pair, that they opened with Yeh Beitcha, and we could say, oh, this is clearly a pair. We see formally in the second pair that they're also a pair, and they're even connected by the term Chaver. But they're a little different from the first pair. How does this differ from the first pair? That's a question.
Yes, it's a good question.
Not that the people who are speaking don't have the same name.
That's certainly significant. It's no longer Yossi and Yossi. Well, let's look at the location. In the first pair, we're told specifically that this is in your house. Now
Yes.
we're talking about shachein, your neighbors, and the person you go and study with. So we're stepping out of the house. We're going into a broader social circle.
But also a close circle. Your teacher,
It's
your
still
friend.
close. Exactly. It's still close. It's not farther away. But we will go farther away now. Let's do the next pair and see where that gets us.
Where are we? 4 Aleph?
It's 4 Aleph. Yehudah ben Tabai.
יהודה בן טבעי אומר, אל תעש עצמך כעורכי הדינים, כשיהיו בעלי הדינים עומדים לפניך, יהיו בעיניך כרשעים, וכשנפטרים מלפניך, יהיו בעיניך כזכאים, כשקיבלו עליהם את הדין.
Okay. This is right. Yehudah ben Tabai said, act not the part of counsel, while the litigants stand before you, regard them as guilty. But as they leave, regard them as innocent, for they have accepted the verdict. Okay.
Okay, where are we? Who is being spoken to?
We're in a court of law, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's really funny, regard them as guilty. It's
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting.
very un-American.
As long as they're fighting with each other, they're guilty.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But once they have made peace, then there's Zakhaim. And these are not people who are being accused of crimes. When it says Ba'alei Hadinim, we're talking about a civil dispute.
Uh-huh.
People are fighting over money or something. And as long as there is that antagonism between them, they're guilty. They're bringing bad stuff into the world. But once they've made peace, then there's Zakhaim, like tzaddikim.
Okay.
I think it's a very nice
Yes.
of civil disagreements.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to 4bet, make our comparison.
So Osher's not available right now. Naomi,
Okay.
any chance you'd be able to read?
The Aleph 5?
4bet.
4 ב'.
Shimon ben Shattach.
שמעון בן סטח אומר, היו מרבה לחקור את העדים, והיו זהיר בדבריך, שמע מתוכם ילמדו לשקר.
Okay, so Shimon ben Shatiach?
Shattach.
Shatach. He's not a car.
No.
Okay.
Teamwork.
Shimon ben Shatach said, examine the witnesses thoroughly and watch your words, lest they learn from them to lie. Okay, I
So
understand, but I don't understand the meaning. Lest they learn from your words to lie. They learn to lie from your words.
Yes. Let's say you're in court. We're in court, and I'm the judge, and I'm asking you questions, and I say, and we're talking about somebody who I don't know, stole some money on Tuesday, and I say, well, tell me, on Tuesday, were you at home? I said, oh yes, I was at home on Tuesday.
It's called leading the witness.
Yeah. So you have to be very careful in exactly how you ask the questions so that the witnesses don't get some idea of what you want to hear. Mitokam yilmadu l'shaker. So what's in common, first of all, in 4 in Aleph?
They're both in court. It's both legal proceedings.
Yeah, we're involved in legal proceedings in both of them. And again, we have something positive on the Aleph side. People eventually are going to be Zakhaim, but on the other side, we're worried that people are going to learn how to lie. Okay, we have 3 pairs now. Let's look at the 3 of them together and see how they flow. We have people flowing from one to another. The pairs have given on from one to another. And actually, their statements move on from one to another. In what sense? Well, we start in the house. Let's start by going out of the house.
Right. You go from the house to maybe the Beit Midrash, or where you're learning, and then to a court. That
So if we're looking at, say, circles in society,
Yes.
relationships, we have the house, we have our partner, we have teachers very close coming into the house and Aleph, it's all within the house. Then we have our neighbors and those who are close to us in the second pair. And then we have people who are connected to us only through law.
Yes. Judges, legal systems.
A dispute. Dispute.
Yeah, in disputes, and if we're the judges and we're judging them in their disputes. So we're no longer looking simply at people that we have personal, neighborly relations with. We're looking at people also in more formal relationships involving judges and defendants, and witnesses, the whole legal system, legal relations, people as being subject to law. There's something else going on here now. We are being told that in each generation, there were two people who were the leaders of the generation who left us some saying or aphorism, which just happened to pair with the other leader. And it just happened that the Nasi said something positive and the Av Beit Din said something negative, or issued a warning. This does not look anymore like a collection of aphorisms. This looks like something, yeah.
It's too contrived.
It's very contrived. It's clearly a highly contrived work of literature. Now, when we look at it as being contrived, first thing that we saw is that we have kind of circles, social circles. We have the house, then what's just outside of the house, friends, neighborhood, nearby, and then the bigger picture of society that's held together by law. And this is one of the descriptions that appears in one of the great commentaries, the commentary of the Maharal of Prague, Derech Hayim, when he speaks about this chapter, he analyzes it. It's one of the great works of Parshanut, because he takes what, until his time, 400 and some years ago, was taken to be a collection of sayings, and he says, no, we have to read this differently. You have to read this as a composition to really understand what's being said here. And we've already seen now certain of the elements of the composition, that we have increasingly wide social circles, we could say. And we have one side which is for the good and one side which is negative. But if we look a little bit more carefully, we can change that perspective a little bit. As we look at the statements, we notice that all of them are in the form of imperatives. Every single one begins with an imperative. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this. That is, the speakers are addressing a specific audience. Each pair actually addresses a different audience. First pair addresses Balabait, somebody in his house, a homeowner, an everyday person. second pair, you see they address the chaver, somebody who is a student at the yeshiva. And the third pair, they do not speak in some abstract way about law or what happens in the court. They actually address the judges.
Yeah.
So we have the three pairs addressing three different groups of people. And these groups are sort of stacked one on top of the other. You have a base of everyone, Balabatim, and then you have a sort of a more limited, narrow group of students, and then a more limited group of judges.
It's a hierarchy.
It's a hierarchy, and might also be a pyramid.
Yes. Pyramid.
So we see ourselves moving here up a pyramid, and at this point we have understood that each pair is addressing a different audience, and that each audience is in some way higher up the ladder. And it seems to be a ladder of learning. We start with people sitting in the dust, beginning to learn. Then they go to school, they have a chaver, and they become dayan. So even before we read the next pair, we can actually prepare a question for the next pair. What would that question be?
Who are they? What do they do?
Say that again.
Who are they, and what is their role in society?
You mean who are the speakers?
Or who's being addressed? No,
Yes. Yes. Who is being addressed? Yes. And if we're looking at the pyramid or a ladder of some sort, we want to know who is next up, who is higher than the dayan, the judge. So the three pairs that we have read have actually prepared us to know what's coming in the next pair. They prepared us to be able to see something which maybe not every reader who hadn't been prepared in this way would see. We'll see that immediately. 5 Aleph.
Naomi, you up for it? You have to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah?
Thanks. 5 Aleph. Can you do 5 Aleph?
Yeah. שמאיה אומר, אהוב את המלאכה ושנא את הרבנות ועל תודה לרשות.
Titvadah.
תתוודע לרשות.
Okay. So
Shemaiah said, love labor, hate domination, and do not make yourself known to the ruling powers. That's the translation that I have.
Okay, that's a translation. Let's look a little more carefully where it says specifically Sneh et harabbanut.
Yes.
We know what the Rabbanut is, and we know what Sneh is. It says literally hate the Rabbanut.
Yes, that's what it says.
That's something difficult to take.
Yeah, that's shocking for its time.
On the other hand, it's something easy to understand, depending on your perspective. But does that tell us anything about where we are on the ladder?
We're talking to leaders of the country.
Yeah.
To hate, don't become too close with the government.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, wait, is that assuming that the government were in someone else's land? Because that means no Mishnah observant Jew should get involved with being in the government.
At least they should not be known to the powers that be. Titvada means to be known to. Whatever you do, keep it quiet. But actually, we're going to get an even clearer understanding about who's being addressed now when we read what Avtalion has to say.
Slide bet, Nomi?
אבטליון אומר, חכמים היזהרו בדבריכם תחובו חובת גלות ותגלו למקום מים רבים הרעים וישתו התלמידים הבאים אחריהם וימותו ונמצא שם שמיים מתחלל.
Shem Shamayim.
שם שמיים מתחלל.
Avtalion said, "Sages, watch your words, lest you incur the penalty of exile and be banished to a place of evil waters, and the disciples that follow you drink and die, and the heavenly name be profaned."
Okay, first of all, what is the next level above Dayanim? What?
Shoftim?
Dayanim are Shoftim. Avtalion just mentioned who he's addressing.
Scholars.
Hakamim, whatever we want to take it to mean, it's Hakamim. So let's explore a little bit about these Hakamim. First of all, as you said earlier, these are people who have the potential to interact with authorities. They're people who are the higher level authorities within the community. But they also have responsibilities as teachers. Not only do they connect with authority, with the Reshut, but they also have students. And did anybody make sense of what Eliezer read as a translation of Talion, what he's actually saying? Because I didn't. Could somebody explain it to me?
Like, don't make yourself a target, because you could be exiled if you go against the powers that be. I don't know.
It reminds me of earlier where it talks about when you invite the scholars into your house, drink their words with thirst. And it ends with, well, here I have a translation. Your words will be twisted and your students will drink these words and die.
Very nice. Yes, there's closure there. On the one hand, you're told to drink with thirst. And here, as a Chacham, you're on the other side. You're the one who's pouring the water.
Yes.
Feeding the students.
So, Mayim Hacha'im, evil waters, seems to me to be a metaphor.
For what?
Some kind of temptation. Drinking and dying, it sounds like a temptation that they've taken something in, and the result will be to Nimtza Shem Shamayim Mitchalel, right? The heavenly name.
Yeah. It's going, whatever it is, it's going to lead to Chilul Hashem. That's the big concern here, Chilul Hashem.
And also be careful with your choice of words was told to the judge.
Yes.
Not to cause the witnesses to lie.
So we're working with all of those now. So we have gone to the next stage above the judges, and we're now dealing with the level of Chokhmah. And since we have reached this level, and we understand now that we are being addressed as Chachamim, congratulations.
We've graduated.
You are now Chachamim. You are in the place of Chachamim and have to understand all that is meant by that. In order to help you a little bit with that, I want to go back just a little bit and look at how we understand within each pair that it's a pair. Each pair has a literary device. We saw in the first pair that the people have the same name, Yosei, and their statements begin with the same words, Yebetcha. And we said this is for the Balabait. This type of connection, where you can see a word for word parallel, is easy. Kita Aleph. That's for Balabatim. They can get to see that that's a pair. So that's the first literary device that we're identifying. Now we come to the second pair, which is the level of the chaver. A chaver, of course, is somebody who studies, has to learn davar mitoch davar. And we see that there is a word there that's connected, chaver and titchaber, but it's not the same as the first words, yebetcha, yebetcha. You have to work on it. You have to look and see that this is a three-part statement, that the third part has to do with judgment, that the middle part has to do with the connection. But you get there because that's what students of literature do. They put together the parts and they compare, and they get to understand that this is meant to be read in parallel as a pair, because it does have that word that connects and has one more thing, which you wouldn't know until you read the next pair. That is, each of them end with an element referring to judgment. And the next matter to be dealt with is judgment. And they each begin somewhere near where we ended the first pair. We have the Chachamim bit as in your house. In 2 Aleph, we have a Selicha Rav. We're continuing with learning, expanding your learning in the beginning of 3 Aleph. And the beginning of 3 Bet begins with Ra, Shechem Ra. And we had at the very end of 2 Bet, Gorem Ra, Latzmo. So we have bad following from bad, and we have the Rav following from Rav. And in fact, we can now see that this pair is placed in the middle by a simple literary device. The end is like the next part. That is, the third element of each statement is like the next pair. The first element is connected to the previous pair. And the element which speaks for this unit itself is in the middle, and that's the one where we have the connecting word chaver. Chaver, al titchaber, l'rasha. And the chibur, the connection, is the function here of this pair. It connects the first pair to the third pair. So that's really the basis of what we're seeing about the chaver, the student, that he's able to make these kinds of readings and analysis and make connections through similarities of words. The third pair is very, very different. There is no longer a literal connection between 4 Aleph and 4 Bet. How did we know that Both of them are speaking to judges.
Well, they talk about litigants and witnesses.
Yes, from the content. From the
Content.
content of their speeches, we knew what the frame of reference is, but
Mhm.
not from words that are repeated. Again, the first pair is directed to the Baal Bayit. It's formatted with a literary device that's appropriate to Baal Bayit. The second pair is addressed to the Chaver, and it's constructed with a literary device appropriate to the Chaver. Third pair is addressed to Dayanim, who are not permitted to look at extraneous matters, who have to listen carefully to the words of the witnesses. And these are the two witnesses, for Aleph and for Bet, that told us that we're dealing with court. So the device for the third pair, the literary device, is the content itself. So we've actually gone with 3 different literary devices in the first 3 pairs. So now we get into pair 4. What is the literary device here? We did a summary before we started pair 4, and we saw that there was this progression and this ladder, this pyramid was being developed. And we already had a question. Before we turned to pair 4, we said, we know now that we're looking at this progression and we're looking for the next element in the progression. We're looking to see what's next up the ladder. At this point, the literary device is no longer simply in the pair, but it's in the reader who has successfully put together the progression of the first 3 pairs and knows to predict that something's going to show up in the 4th pair that will tell us where we are on the ladder. And sure enough, Avtalion says, Chachamim. The minute you see that, you say, oh, of course, now we're 1 ladder up above Dayanim, we're at Chachamim. So I would say the literary device is being used by the 4th pair is the reader.
Mhm.
It's within the reader. It's not within the text. Without an active reader who puts together all of the information that's embedded in the text, before you get to the 4th pair, you won't understand it. Unless you're Laurentine, who can understand from Al Titvada the Rashut, we're talking to the serious people who run things. And that's a very good observation. And specifically, they're called Kakabin. So where do we stand? Where are we going from here? Just before we go, I do want to say one more thing about Avtalion, because we can't leave that since he's addressing us as Chachamim. There really is no literal content to what he says. But we can understand it in different ways. Remember now, we have just been addressed for the first time as Chachamim. We have some special knowledge that not everybody has. And our knowledge, at least insofar as it goes to Pirke Avot, and what we read up till now, is that this text, which has been read for nearly 2,000 years as a collection of sayings, is not a collection of sayings. It's not anything like what it presents itself to be. It is so contrived and so masterfully composed that we have to say we are listening to a master who is speaking to us and who has gotten our attention as readers by finally addressing us as Chachamim, with the understanding that it will be very difficult for us to go out and tell the world that Pirke Avot is not a collection of sayings. Who's going to listen to us? And if you say that, if you say that it's not a collection of sayings, if you say it's a composition by Rebbe, and you say that these 5 pairs could not cover the period of 400 years that Rebbe's trying to cover historically, you're going to make some people lose their faith.
Mhm.
Maybe not their faith in God, maybe not their faith in the Torah, but certainly their faith in Rebbe as being a historian. As Rebbe as simply being there to tell us about how whatever Torah Moshe got was passed along from generation to generation. So once you reach this stage and you see that you have this kind of closure with the beginning where you were a student and had to drink, and now you're Chacham and you have knowledge that you have to be very careful with, you have to know who you can tell and how you can tell it. And I'm not saying that just the character of Pirke Avot is at stake here. There's much, much larger things. There is knowledge which is not to be related to everyone. And that's where we began. We began saying that this is the story of the esoteric teaching that came from Sinai. And we've reached this point now understanding how Rebbe is addressing us to deal with the esoteric teaching. Now that we've arrived here, and we've been prepared by being told you have to be really careful and not let on to everything that we know, that we've heard, we're ready for the final step. And in order to get there, again, we have to review, because the one thing that we've learned up till now is that each step is dependent on an understanding of everything that came before. We're building an edifice, a pyramid. And as we go up the pyramid, while we have looked at different classes of Balabait, Chaver, and Dayanim in the first 3 groups, and the 4th group also, once we understood where we're going, so that's Chachamim, is really quite different in the 4th group, because the text doesn't really tell us that clearly as it did in the earlier ones. It's only because we had put together everything to get to the point of understanding it that we could understand that it was really Chachamim. We had to do it. We were addressed. So now we come to ask the final question. We're looking at the pyramid, and we're going to ask, who is on top? Who's on top of the pyramid? What do you think?
The Chachamim.
Nah, we just passed the Chachamim. We're in the 4th pair. We're going to go to the 5th pair now.
Well, I mean, I read the next line, so Hillel v'Shammai.
But they're the ones who speak, but who's being addressed? Who's it for?
Well, I make a modest proposal here. It's one of the things that
Should we
you
read it
shouldn't
first? Or
say. What, Elias?
should we read it first, or you want to do a spoiler?
No, before you read it. You only have to
Okay.
work this out before you read it.
Okay, go ahead.
I think anyway. Because
Go ahead.
we see we've gone up the steps of the ladder. We've had to use our own reasoning to get to it. And if we're going to say who's at the top, and we're no longer speaking about classes of people, we're not talking about balabatim, we're not talking about dayanim. We're talking about who is the single individual who is left to be on top. I believe we have to say that is me, the reader. You have been taught through these other 4 pairs that there is a ladder to climb. And you have climbed up the ladder successfully once you get to Avtalion. And you can see that there is only one place to go. And since it's the peak of a pyramid, only one person can stand there. It's no longer a matter of a class of individuals or a social class or an intellectual class. Now we can begin. 6. And before we do, we just point out that now we are at Hillel and Shammai, who are, of course, at the very top of the pyramid themselves, because they are the peak of the age of Second Temple, very end, and they are the first of the Chachamim of the time of the Mishnah. The really important Chachamim was something like a couple of hundred disputes between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, which form the basis of the Mishnah and the Talmud. They are the sources. They're both the end and the beginning. So let's look now what they have to say.
Naomi, up for it?
I can try. הלל אומר, היו מתלמידיו של אהרון, אוהב שלום ורודף שלום, אוהב את הברית ומקרבן לתורה. הוא היה אומר נגד
This is Aramaic.
שמה? Okay, this is
Shema aved shmei, v'delo mosif yasef, delo yalif katala chayav, v'ishtamash bataga chalaf.
Thank you. I wouldn't have been able to do that. הוא היה אומר, אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי.
Okay. So we got to that point where he can now speak in the first person.
Can I do the English?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So Hillel said, be of the students of Aaron, loving peace, pursuing peace, loving one's fellow man, and drawing them close to the Torah. He also said, he who invokes the name will lose his name. He who adds not will be taken away. He who studies not deserves death, and he who makes use of the crown, the capital C, will soon be gone. He also said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am for myself, if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Very famous.
Yeah. So first of all, once we've reached this level, we've gone past the level of Chokhmah, and we're at the level where we are standing on the top of the shoulders of all those who've come before, and we sense where we are. Hillel addresses us, and he says, welcome. Havu mitamidav shel Aharon. Welcome to the, I don't know what to call it, the association of the students of Aaron. That's what we've just joined. What is that?
Actually, can I just add to that? That actually, that was sort of going to be my guess, was that above the Chachamim is the Kohen HaGadol. And who do they mention? They mention Kohen HaGadol here. Right?
Certainly,
So
the Kohen Gadol is the figurehead of the single individual who functions for the community.
exactly,
So
yes.
we're talking about the top of the pyramid.
Yes.
But we're also being addressed. We're there with whoever it is. And we are there with Aharon, and we are being invited to be his students. That is, we are invited to join this group who call themselves the students of Aaron. And what are the qualifications for joining that? Ohev Shalom, Deif Shalom, Ohevet Ebriot, Mekarvan Torah. There is something more in this thing. The way this is written is as if we know these characteristics of Aaron from having read this someplace in the Torah. Well, that's not true. None of that appears in the Torah. There's absolutely nothing in the Torah that refers to Aaron in these terms. And if anything, Aaron gets some bad publicity from having created the golden calf. So it's a little bit difficult to take him in these idealized terms. But on the other hand, if we listen carefully to what Hillel is saying, Hillel says, welcome to the level where we create midrash, where we continue the Torah. We continue the development of the Torah with new perushim, midrashim, like Ohev Shalom, Odeif Shalom, Ohevet Ebriot, Mekarvan Torah. Certainly we want to say good things about Aaron. We want to see him in some idealized position. He's the high priest. So this is not really different than other types of midrash, where we take something from the text. We could bring in a Shene Amar here someplace and probably tack it on to something. But in any case, Hillel is saying that those who are described as students of Aaron, those who are members of our society, are people who know how to expand the Torah, people who know how to continue the tradition, make it a living tradition, be part of creating the tradition. And then the statement in Aramaic is hidden. It's in Aramaic. It's only for those who can make it out. And it's a little bit like Avtalion because it's very, very enigmatic. It's not clear at all what it means. But one way of reading it indicates that those who pick up the name, that is the divine name, meaning those who are involved with the continuation of divine revelation through the Torah, through this living revelation, and add to it, or if they don't add to it, then they should be cut off. And if they actually take it and use it and are crowned with it, so maybe they go off like those who were called up to heaven. Or on the other hand, maybe it means lo lasot kardom. Maybe you shouldn't use it to take advantage, like we had earlier, to hate the Rabbanut, meaning not to want to have the benefits of positions of authority. Can be read in different ways. But finally, the complete verification of our process we've been developing, im ein ani li. If I don't do it, who will? Okay, I want to stop actually now. So let's just read Shammai quickly, and we'll have to come back to this next time.
Absolutely, yeah, you can do that.
Mhm.
Naomi, you want to take it?
Yeah. שמאי אומר, עשה תורתך, is this קבוע or קבע?
Keva.
קבע, אמור מעט ועשה הרבה, והיו מקבל את כל אדם בסבר פנים יפות.
Shammai said, make regular your study of the Torah, say little and do much, and greet everyone cheerfully.
The translations are so far from the Hebrew, I can't help but laugh.
Yeah, go. You wanna offer a better translation?
Well, let's go line by line.
Okay.
I said Torah Keva, make your Torah a thing of permanence.
Mhm.
Meaning, if you are someone who, as Hillel hints, is creative in the way of doing Torah, make it permanent, bring it into the world, teach it, write it, make it permanent. I said Toratcha, your Torah, Keva. Amor Ma'ata Seharbe, that I think is pretty clear that you don't want to speak too much. You're told just above, Hizaru b'divrei chem, so you don't speak a lot, but you do a lot. You can be creative, aseh harbe, and have mekavel et kol adam b'sefer panim yafot, that with a pleasant face, have a pleasant face for everyone. It's sort of like a Buddha look. Sever panim yafot. So he says, do your thing, be creative, but be quiet about it, and don't make waves. Okay, so that gets us to the top with the advice from the people at the top, Hillel and Shammai, how people who are capable and have the responsibility for developing revelation as a continuing possibility have to take these things into account. And that's where Rebbe has taken us through the pairs. He's taken us on an amazing trip from the Baal Bayit, who sits in the dirt and listens, to the level where one actually creates and contributes to the ongoing revelation through the Torah. And next time, we will put that together with the Decalogue.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, and you'll arrange a time, Elias.
Yes, we'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, we'll save questions for them too as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It was super interesting. Thank you.
Great. Glad to be here, and we'll continue.
Same woven Torah time, same woven Torah channel. We'll let you know. Okay, good.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you so much.